Welcome to Lauren's House COVID Mental Wellness Check-In. I'm Monique Graves, and today we will be presenting on communication. What did you say? Yes, that's right, communication. Today's presenter is none other than Angelequea Bradley. Angelequea is an LCSW with over 10 years experience working with children, teenagers, young adults, and adults. She holds a master's degree from the University of Southern California and a bachelor's of arts from the University of California, Riverside. She uses person-centered, non-judgmental approach to assist individuals in working through their depression, past trauma, anxiety, and a myriad of life stressors and situations that can impact their daily lives. Without further ado, Angelequea Bradley, please remember to put your comments in the chat. We look forward to seeing you at the end.
So sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So I have various words that kind of indicate communication. But I kind of wanted to know, kind of for you guys, what is something that you hear often, or how would you describe communication, or how are ways that you communicate? I have a few, such as like text messaging, email, as well as yelling can be a way of communicating. So as much as we have verbal communication, there's also nonverbal communication. So that could be smiling. It can be certain facial features you make. It can also be like a tone that you make when you're speaking. It can be physical, like shrugging your shoulders. Sometimes we talk with our hands as well. There's kind of different ways that we kind of use communication. And so if you have any suggestions or any type of ways that you kind of use communication, or how you would describe communication, you can definitely mention it in the chat box. There's 4 different communication styles that we're going to focus on for today. So the first one would be passive. So when we talk about passive communication, we're really talking about someone who may be very indirect. We're talking about someone who can be indirect. Sometimes they respond with their head down. They're usually just agreeing with that other person when they're communicating. Then there's passive aggressive, similar to passive, but a little different, because you may hear something different in someone's tone. So they may not, they may be speaking to you, or someone may be speaking to them, but their head may not be down. But they may be looking at that person, but they may just agree with what they're saying, but their tone might be different. So they may say, fine, whatever, when someone's telling them something or asking them something. So that could be an example of passive aggressive. And we'll go through each of these as well, so you get an understanding of what each of these type of communication styles are. There's also aggressive. So that can just be yelling, being very direct, not listening to that other person. That's definitely an example of aggressive communication. And then assertive communication, which is usually a communication style that allows for both individuals to feel like they can speak honestly and directly to each other, and feel like what each person is saying is definitely being heard. So those are the 4 types. And like I said, we're going to go through each of them individually. I also have a video for us to kind of see an example of all 4 types of communication styles. So the first one I'm presenting is passive. So the behaviors of a person who's displaying passive communication, it would be, they don't make eye contact. They have a difficulty saying no. It's more of a go with the flow attitude and poor posture. Like when I said before, like they may present with their head down when someone's talking to them, and they're not able to make direct eye contact. And they may use phrases as, it doesn't matter that much, or I just want everyone to get along. They just want to kind of go with the flow and kind of have no issues, no conflict. But that's not always the best way to communicate, because then you're not necessarily communicating what your needs are, your thoughts or feelings. The next example I have is passive aggressive. So that the behavior of someone with passive aggressive is sarcasm. Their words don't necessarily match their actions. The facial expressions don't match their actions, and they have a difficulty sharing feelings. So one example I gave was fine, whatever. So their tone might be kind of have like a certain kind of tone where they may have an attitude. There's also say after saying something mean or rude, they may just say, "Oh, I was joking," when in actuality, it was kind of passive aggressive. They may say nothing's wrong, I'm fine, when maybe on their face they may look sad or look down, but they may not, share their feelings. So that's more of a passive aggressive because they're not expressing what's truly going on inside. Um, they may respond to someone with like, you think you know everything, don't you? So again, that's not being very direct, like with their actions. So they're saying that person thinks they know everything when in fact that's not the case. So that's passive aggressive. Again, we'll see an example of passive aggressive. There's also aggressive communication as well. So that's someone that talks over other people, yelling, not listening to that other person, controlling and demanding. They may point fingers, intimidate, threaten. So that's very aggressive communication. Maybe someone's angry, upset. Some phrases they may use is "because I said so." They always feel that they should be right, the other person is wrong. Also blaming things on other people, as well as it's just my way or the highway. There's no listening or taking to other people's feelings or thoughts when communicating. The last example we have is assertive. So assertive communication really allows for both individuals, or to whomever is talking, to kind of allow each person to kind of share what they're feeling or desiring. So the behaviors can be expressing their desires and needs with confidence. Um, they kind of encourage a balanced conversation. So again, both people have the chance to speak. Also using I statements, and that's something we're going to introduce a little later in the presentation, but they're able to use I statements. They say no, and they're able to make eye contact. So some phrases that someone who's using assertive communication may say is, I respect the needs and opinions of others. We all have a right to express ourselves respectfully and honestly. Um, and so that is definitely a type of communication that's usually ideal to use, is assertive communication, because again, it allows for both parties to speak openly. There's eye contact. So you're speaking with the intention of, I have something to say and I want you to hear it, and I want to listen to what you have to say too. Um, it's not working there. And it won't allow me to share it either. So okay, so it was examples of each type of communication style that I kind of went over. So the passive aggressive, aggressive, and assertive as well. Unfortunately, the video is not working, so we're just going to kind of move on. But something to kind of note, I want to say is when thinking of passive aggressive, it's kind of like allowing someone to pass over you. It's like not necessarily speaking up for yourself when somebody kind of makes a demand of you or asks something of you. So let's say someone asks you to go somewhere with them, like go to the store, but you have something really important to do at home. You may decide to not, address the things that you have to do and just kind of go along with something somebody else wants to do. And then passive aggressive can kind of look like, sometimes it's not being completely honest. Sometimes it's talking about someone behind their back. That's how passive aggressive also can look. And then also aggressive communication, again, is like someone yelling, being dishonest, not listening to another person. And then assertive communication is when both individuals feel like they are both being heard and they both can kind of speak openly in regards to whatever subject matter you're discussing. So the most effective communication, which I had mentioned, was assertive communication. And the kind of the different to kind of describe assertive communication. There's different kind of ways to kind of show how assertive communication shows up. So that could be making direct eye contact, using a confident tone, standing up straight, using positive facial expressions, because sometimes our facial expressions can really show what we're dealing with inside. Like if we're annoyed or frustrated or bothered by something, it shows up on our face. So that's kind of your body language you want to be very aware of when using assertive communication. And then also kind of how you interact and communicate is also, staying calm, being polite, but also firm, listening to the other person's kind of view as well. And then also something that we're going to talk about is I statements. So that is kind of the best way to kind of use assertive communication, and also allows you to kind of get your point across in a positive way, and allows that person to know kind of what you're feeling. So let's see. So I have here an activity. Hopefully you can all participate in choosing kind of the different it's kind of it's multiple choice. So what I have here is I want you to so there's 4 statements, and so I want you to choose which one you would consider to be passive aggressive. So we have A as do what I say, B as fine whatever, C I disagree with you, I see the situation this way, and then D, okay, you're right. And so if you could tell me which one of these phrases would be considered something that's passive aggressive. And then you can use a chat box and just put in the letter that would indicate the phrase that goes with passive aggressive. Okay. So it would be B. Someone saying fine, whatever would definitely be an example of passive aggressive. Because in that phrase, that individual is not expressing, what's bothering them or what they need, or, what that other person can do better. So this doesn't allow for like a balanced exchange of communication. So that would be an example of passive aggressive. The next phrase is I want everyone to agree with me. So A, assertive, B, aggressive, C, passive, or D, passive aggressive. So what would you guys think that phrase would indicate wanting everyone to agree with them? Okay, so this would be B, so aggressive. Again, if you want everyone to agree with you, then that indicates that you're not taking the time to listen to another person's opinion or thoughts. You're also just saying what kind of what you want, and you're not coming with kind of like, how can this be kind of a balanced conversation where we both kind of get what we need, or we both kind of hear what we're both hearing each other and kind of listening to each other. So that's why that would be an example of aggressive communication. Because again, it's not allowing each person who's talking to feel like they're being heard. It's only that one individual saying, I want everyone to agree with me, and whatever I have to say kind of goes. It's that my way or the highway kind of thinking. And that kind of goes along with their communication style. So the next one is what would be an example of passive communication? A was I want what you want, do what I say. C would be you want everything to be perfect, and D would I feel offended by what you said. So which letter would be an example of passive communication, you think? Okay. So passive communication. So A would be the example for passive communication. I want what you want. So that person is not expressing what they want, what their needs are. They're not expressing any type of feeling. There's really kind of like allowing that person, again, which I said, passive communication is allowing someone to kind of pass over you. So you're just like, okay, well, whatever you want, whatever you say, it goes. I want what you want. But again, you need to kind of express what your needs and your feelings are when you are communicating, as well as allowing that other person to feel like, okay, well, I have a response to that, or I can, this is kind of a balanced conversation. And then looking at the other lines, like do what I say, that would definitely be an example of aggressive communication, because that trying to control an individual. And then you want everything to be perfect. That would be an example of, passive aggressive communication. That individual would not really be expressing kind of what they want and what they feel, and they're kind of telling that person, this is what you want, and putting that kind of that blame onto that other person. And then D would be a good example of assertive communication. Again, you're using kind of an I statement, which is you're saying what you feel and what bothered you. So that's an example of passive. Going into the next slide. I appreciate you. I appreciate you were honest with me. So A being passive, B being passive aggressive, C aggressive, and D assertive. So if any of you guys want to kind of take a stab at that phrase and choose kind of what letter do you feel would be most appropriate? Okay. So for this phrase, it would definitely be assertive communication. I appreciate you were honest with me. That's a perfect example of someone using I. So they're stating, how they're coming from their own perspective. And they're letting you kind of know what they feel. Like, I appreciate you're honest with me. They're saying, I appreciate what you did. What you did was direct and very honest. And I appreciate that you were honest with me. So definitely an example of assertive communication. So assertive communication is the use of I statements. And so I statements are an effective way to use assertive communication. And so the next slide I have here is kind of the key terms when you are using assertive communication that can be really effective. So let's say the I is kind of you taking responsibility for what you are feeling. And then the when is you're kind of speaking specifically about a person's actions that triggered your emotions. And then the because part is because you explain how it affects you. It should be when, and we'll look at in the other slide. Let's go into this other slide. Or it actually should be need. But going into this slide, so this is kind of an example of the I statement. So in this the first statement, it says, I feel annoyed when you keep on checking if I've done my homework, because it tells me you don't trust me and I need to be able to prove to you I can do it on my own. And so, like I said, the first phrase says, I feel. So you're expressing what your feelings are. You're taking responsibility for your feelings. And then the when you're, so it's, let's say it's authority figure or a parent or caregiver keeps asking if you've done your homework. And so you're specifically saying what is kind of annoying you. So it's them checking on you. Because and then you go into explaining what it does. It makes me feel like you don't trust me. And then following up with, I need to be able to prove to you I can do it on my own, is saying, this is kind of how we resolve this. And this will help me to feel a little bit better about this, about, let's say, you being your homework, your parent caregiver checking on you if you've done your homework. So that's a good example of how you can use I statements. Another example I have is I get confused and hurt when you leave dirty clothes on the floor, because I communicated how important it is to put them in the laundry basket. So again, this person is using, when you are using, again, I statements, using that I, and then kind of connecting with what you're feeling. So I get confused and hurt and what the specific action is kind of, you left dirty laundry on the floor. And so that causes me to feel confused and hurt. And then speaking about, what was done in the past, like I communicated how important it is for you to put them in the laundry basket. And that's kind of like, this is kind of that compromise versus like, you spoke to that person already, or they spoke to you. And so it's kind of going back and kind of saying, I need you to kind of put the laundry in the laundry basket. So going into the next one, I feel angry when you take my things without asking. Again, you're taking responsibility for your feelings. You're saying what you feel, followed by the specific action that that person is doing. And then lastly, asking, how do you resolve it? What can we do? What can be done instead? Can you ask me first before taking my things? And so those are really three good examples of how to use I statements. So I wanted to do an I statement activity as well. Okay, so someone just respects your privacy by looking through your phone. Um, so what would be the appropriate way to respond using an I statement? Um, A, you could respond with, "Why did you go through my phone? You have no right." B could be, "I feel angry when you go through my phone because you invaded my privacy. Can you please ask me if you can look through my phone?" So this would be B would obviously be the appropriate answer because that's definitely an I statement. Um, it's definitely an I statement that you can use. Again, the I in feeling, taking responsibility, and then because you stating what that person specifically did, and then coming up with a kind of a solution to kind of addressing, what can be done in the future for next time. I do see a question here of, when I get angry, I call people names. Um, and so I'm not exactly sure if that's a question, or would you want to know kind of the best way to kind of address when you get angry and call, and like maybe to avoid calling people names? So we will definitely kind of get to that. We'll follow up at the end with kind of questions, and maybe state some better ways to kind of communicate when you get angry. Maybe using the I statements by specifically saying, "I feel angry," and specifically what makes you angry, like what made you angry, and what's the solution in order to not call people names. So we can definitely follow that up at the end. um, so we have one more example. So a situation is someone tells a secret you shared. Again, two options. One can be B, "I can't trust that person. I never want to speak to you again." That could be a response when someone tells your secret. Or another option would be, what are you really feeling? So this person can, tell that friend, like, "I felt sad and hurt when you shared my secret because I trusted you with my secret. And I need you to not do that again." Again, that's specifically saying what you're feeling, pointing out what that behavior or action is that triggered that emotion, and then coming up with a solution as to what can be done instead, what can be done next time. So the answer would definitely be A for that example. So I have here uh, an example of I statement examples of an authority figure has asked you to take out the trash for the second time, but you're busy with something important. So what I wanted to see if anyone could maybe come up with their own type of I statements, or maybe give an example of something that's happened to you, or maybe someone has asked you to do something, and you haven't been able to do it because you're doing something, and how have you responded in the past, and then how could you respond using an I statement. I do have an example of kind of how you could respond to this I statement, but if anybody has like a response or wants to kind of share how they would respond to someone authority figure asking them to take out the trash or do some type of task for the second time if they're doing something, how? Okay. So an authority figure has asked you to take out the trash for the second time, but you're busy with something important. So an I statement that you could use is, "I feel frustrated when you continue to ask me to take out the trash because I'm doing something important. Can I take it out when I'm done?" So again, you're stating what you're feeling. You're specifically pointing out what is causing you the frustration, what action is triggering your frustration, followed by kind of what you're doing, kind of like, I'm doing something important, and then following it up with, what's the solution, what's something that we both can kind of agree on to be able to move forward. And that would be an example of an I statement. And then also, using assertive communication, because you're trying to come up with a solution as to, how can we both kind of meet in the middle when we're communicating. So those are our I statements. So with I statements in these communication styles, there can be barriers to communication, unfortunately. Sometimes we're just not able to communicate with each other, and there's just kind of these things that kind of get in the way of being able to communicate. So I do list some of the barriers to communication, and so I'm going to go over some of those. So what those can be is, when you're communicating with someone, sometimes it can just be too much information. Sometimes you can be just saying so many things, that it can be information overload, and they may not know how to respond to you in an appropriate manner. They may respond in a passive manner, or even passive aggressive. So that can be an example of when there's a barrier to communication. There can also be kind of lack of communication skills, or misunderstanding of the message too. And when I say lack of communication skills, I mean, like, maybe that person doesn't have the communication skills of knowing how to use I statements, or how to use assertive communication. Um, and so that can definitely be a barrier to you kind of having a conversation that's each person feels like they can both communicate and they feel like they're both being heard. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding of the message. So maybe it's misunderstood, maybe it's misheard, maybe that person kind of understands it in a different way than you kind of explaining it. So that's definitely an example of kind of a misunderstanding of a message. Sometimes there are emotional distractions. Sometimes individuals are going through their own feelings and emotions. Sometimes they're feeling frustrated or sad, and you don't necessarily know that, and you're talking, and they may respond to you in a passive aggressive way, or even aggressive, because of what's going on with them internally. And then sometimes there's a lack of knowledge. So just not understanding or not having enough information on kind of what is being discussed or what you're talking about. And then there can be a lack of interest. Some people may not want to hear what you have to say, or they're just not interested in what you have to say. And so that can definitely lead to some barriers to communicating and kind of being able to speak to each other in a balanced manner. So those are some barriers. So I have when to seek help. So sometimes in our relationships with our family, that's kind of sometimes when we want to be able to seek help, because we really want to be able to be heard by that person, and we really want them to be able to kind of understand us. So sometimes there can be poor listening skills. So maybe individual is not able to kind of hear you, or they just don't understand what you're saying. Sometimes a misunderstanding of another person's statement or motivation, that can kind of cause arguments, or kind of just cause really poor communication. And sometimes it can kind of lead to just kind of ongoing aggressive communication, which is definitely not healthy or helpful in anyone being heard. Then there's also lack of communication skills. So an individual, family member, or authority figure cannot have the communication skills in order to have effective communication. They don't necessarily have the assertive communication skills. So that could be a reason that you may want to seek help. And then sometimes in conversation that they can be making wrong assumptions about what you're saying, or what you could be making wrong assumptions about that person is saying. So that's also time to kind of seek help. And so it's also understanding that there's kind of a pattern. So if you and this person have this pattern of not communicating well, like over a period of time, there's always kind of this misunderstanding, or maybe that person's not hearing or listening to what you're saying, or they just don't have the ability to kind of utilize assertive communication or effective communication skills with you. And it's over a period of time, that's definitely maybe a sign that, okay, well, maybe we need to seek help. Maybe there's like a therapist that we can speak to and talk to, or somebody that can, maybe a counselor that maybe can help us through some of our communication barriers. And so that is definitely a time to seek help.
So it says, when I tell my mom no, she says I'm being disrespectful. When I get angry, I call people
Okay.
names.
Okay.
I don't feel heard
Oh,
when I talk to
okay.
people. What do I do?
So, okay, let's start with the first question. When I tell my mom no, she says, I am disrespectful. So hopefully, the individual can respond to me maybe in the chat, or maybe just ask another question, and maybe Monique can let me know. But that would be a good time to use an I statement. So, I mean, there's nothing, definitely using the word no is very assertive and it's effective because, again, explaining kind of what you're feeling, but it's kind of like, what's the follow up? So, no, I feel, I don't, I'm not sure what the situation may be. But let's say you're feeling frustrated. So, like, no, I feel frustrated because of this, that, and the, I don't know if your mom may be asking you something, and maybe you're doing something that maybe prevents you from doing what she wants you to do. But it can be, I feel confused or I feel hurt, but definitely kind of coming from a place where you're explaining kind of what your feelings are. Again, using those I statements, what your feelings are, and then specifically what the action is. So if your mom is asking you to do something, like, what, I feel frustrated, or I feel confused when you ask me to do this, when I'm, in the middle of, let's say you're watching TV. That's just an example, but let's say you're watching TV, or you're on your phone. It's kind of like, maybe you're in the middle of something. So it's kind of like, I'm frustrated with you asking me to do this because, I'm doing something on my phone. Can I do it in 5 minutes? So again, you're taking responsibility of what you're feeling, and then also pointing out to you, like, okay, mom, this is what you're doing, and I'm trying to do this over here. How can we both kind of agree to kind of move forward? So it could be, again, you saying, okay, well, I can do what you want, or I can do that in 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or kind of giving kind of a solution to kind of what that person needs are, but also your needs too. um and again, your parent, your mom may not agree with it. She definitely doesn't have to. But what you're trying to do is start to use this assertive communication. The hope is that your mom will be able to respond to you using some type of effective communication as well. If she feels like, okay, no, I need you to do it now, then it's kind of like, okay, followed up with another I statement. And which can be, I feel like you're pushing me, or I feel like, and it could just be that, like, I feel like you're pushing me to do something and I'm just not quite ready. Is it possible for me to do it in 5 minutes, or do it in a less amount of time? But maybe figuring out a way where you guys are both kind of exchanging, and you're keeping in mind that you're, having positive facial expressions, and you're trying to kind of not show any type of irritation, but you're trying to kind of get your point across. So that could be a way to definitely kind of, communicate with your mom. And again, the hope is that she's also learning and understanding kind of what I statements are too. And then the next question is, when I get angry, I call people names. Okay. And again, how can you express that in more of an I statement? So how can you express that you're feeling angry? And also what specifically is making you angry? So maybe, trying to figure out, what's making me angry about these individuals, and how can I pull back from calling them names? Like, if you're using an I statement, you're not necessarily calling anyone's name, because you're just kind of taking responsibility for what you're feeling. So, I feel angry because maybe a friend or an individual did something to you. So you're saying, I feel angry because of what that person did to me. And maybe you don't want to be around that person. So you can say, I'm just going to choose not to be around that person, or I'm going to separate myself from a situation that may be causing me to, continue to make me feel angry. But it's definitely trying to figure out a solution where it's like, definitely you're not like blaming or calling other people names, because that would be kind of an example of aggressive that's kind of an aggressive communication style. And so what you want to do is have that assertive communication and just speak on what you're feeling because of what that person may have did to you. And then also, what they can do instead. And if you don't have the power to say, okay, what can you do instead, then what power do you have over yourself? Because you can control yourself. So it's like, okay, well, what can I do? Can I remove myself from the situation to prevent myself from calling other people names? And then I believe the other question was, I don't feel heard. What do I do? So I don't know specifically kind of in what situation, if it's whatever, well, when I talk to people. Okay. So you don't feel heard when I talk to people. So then I'm guessing this might be like in a group setting, or it could even just be maybe one-on-one. But it's also kind of, again, you can definitely use I statements, but kind of also going back to being aware of maybe your body language as well when you are talking with other people. Like, how is your posture? Is your back straight? Are you how are your facial expressions? Are you speaking with your head up? And is it kind of like, can you use I statements like, can you say, hey, I don't feel like I'm being heard when we're talking about this. Let's say it could be in a classroom, when we're talking about this, can you all make an effort to listen to what I have to say? I don't know, it would depend on like really what setting it would be in, to determine how you can maybe assert your communication. But I statements are definitely something that you can definitely use to definitely assert yourself and kind of communicate with others when you feel like you're not being heard. Is there any other questions, or maybe even if the person who had asked, you don't feel heard when talking to people, maybe telling me like maybe specifically what situation or setting that you're in, could also be helpful.
All right, all right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. It was so amazing hearing you talk about communication. I think that we all have to work. That's something that we have to work on, and sometimes we don't
Mhm.
come from environments or families that communication is something that we actually do.
Yeah.
Well, she has a question. Yes, when my
Okay.
mom yells, what do I do?
Okay. Is this the same one or no? Okay, I see. Okay. Um, well, the hope is that your mom is able to kind of learn about effective communication. I mean, we just talked about it, so maybe talking to your mom about what I statements are, later today, and kind of talking about what I statements, and maybe asking, can we start to kind of communicate in that way? Obviously, it definitely takes time to learn, to undo some of the ways that you already communicate. So if, let's say your mom does yell often and that's the way that she kind of communicates, it will definitely take her time to start to say, okay, what are I statements, what is assertive communication, how can I use these assertive communication patterns when communicating with you. You can also respond using iMessages when she does yell. And I don't know how if you resolve it, when she yelling, if you kind of step away from her to, allow each other to cool down. But when you're in a better space, when it's not as kind of like so much kind of aggression, maybe then, coming back to her and saying, what, if I felt hurt, or I felt scared even when you were yelling at me, can we make an effort to really try to use I statements when we're communicating and talking to each other? And again, it may take you time and take mom time to really learn how to communicate in that effective manner. But definitely when it's a calm time, making that effort to kind of say, hey, I really want to use these I statements. I think it will really be helpful in our communication. I can't
I
hear.
think sometimes the
Okay.
difficult part is like when we grew up and when we grow up in families in some cultures, like kids talking is not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like kind of like, do as I say, not as I do. Like I tell you what to do, but like it kind of seems a little bit like as a kid, like sometimes we don't have, or sometimes kids don't have like an opinion, or they can't have their own opinion. And so learning how to maneuver, it's like you would have to teach it's like teaching. You'd have to teach your parent that if that's not something that your parent is, used to.
That's why I was, that's what I'm saying, before even like this would be something that you go home and kind of talk to your mom about and say, I learned something about I statements. This is what it is, providing examples. Again, it definitely would not be something that would happen overnight. Because again, there's definitely culturally a way of communicating for people of color specifically on like this is how we communicate by yelling. We communicate in an aggressive manner. That's just the norm for a lot of families. And so it's kind of introducing something a kind of new and a new way to communicate would definitely take time. But it's like by you using it, your hope is that, eventually your parent will start to say, okay, well, maybe I can try this. Maybe this is something. But again, it's going to take time. It's not going to be something overnight, and it's going to be something that's going to have to be constantly addressed. Like, and also just talking about our feelings. Sometimes feelings is just not talked about in our family. So, saying you hurt my feelings by yelling at me, and then that parent has to figure out, like, well, what does that mean if I hurt your feelings? Because oftentimes parents aren't concerned about feelings and all, like they're like, no, I need you to do as do as I say. So that could be kind of just starting to kind of get in this kind of mode of being able to feel comfortable just telling your parent, like, you hurt my feelings, or what you said, it made me feel this way. And the hope is that your parent will start to recognize, like, okay, well, what I'm saying can be hurtful, or what I said to, him or her was, wasn't effective, and it hurt them. So what can I do next time? And again, it definitely will take time. Definitely will take time to kind of learn a new communication style.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And to the people who joined us, we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all. Have a great day.
All right. See you later.
All right. Bye-bye.